picture this. It's the middle of the week, and you are standing in the sun-baked dirt of Eunice, New Mexico.
Yeah, it's quite a visual.
Right. The heat is like shimmering off the pavement. The air is bone dry. And standing right there in the desert is the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, putting a literal shovel into the ground.
Which is, I mean, just a huge moment.
It is. Because according to the notes we're looking at today from the Uranium Unleashed report, this is for the week of August 17th to the 21st, 2026. That exact moment is, well, it's a lot more than just a photo op.
Oh, absolutely.
It means the West has essentially stopped just passing around, policy papers and has actually started pouring concrete. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at data today that is basically screaming that the global nuclear fuel market is structurally rebuilding in real time.
Yeah, it's the ultimate transition from a theoretical thesis to physical reality. I mean, for the last few years, we've talked endlessly about securing the nuclear fuel cycle.
Right, the endless white papers.
Exactly. But, you can't put a white paper into a nuclear reactor. You need actual physical infrastructure.
Sure.
So that shovel in the New Mexico dirt, it's the ultimate symbol that the capital is finally moving.
And that's exactly what we are unpacking today. We want to really understand why this specific week is such a turning point. We're going to take you from that dirt in New Mexico to the mining plains of Wyoming and all the way to Kazakhstan.
It's a busy week.
It really is. But before we get to all that infrastructure, let's start with the number that kind of sets the baseline for this whole conversation.
Let's hear it.
So the uranium U3O8 spot price, it closed the week at roughly $88.29 per pound.
Right.
Which is up about 1.5%. Okay, so let's unpack this. Why is the market neither panicking nor euphoric right now? I mean, it feels like we had massive landscape-shifting news this week, so why did the price just move in this very, controlled way?
Well, it's a brilliant question because in a less mature market, say the uranium market we had 2 or 3 years ago, this exact same combination of news might have just violently spiked the spot price.
Like straight toward $95 or something.
Easily. Toward 95, maybe even higher.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of retail investors are kind of scratching their heads right now, but we're seeing a very measured shift. And the reason comes down to understanding what the spot price actually represents in this specific industry right now.
Okay.
Because spot is, honestly, it's just a lagging indicator.
Right, because utilities, they don't usually buy their nuclear fuel on the spot market like you'd buy, I don't know, a gallon of gas on your way to work.
Precisely. The real conviction in the uranium market, it lives in the term price. The long-term contracts.
Which is sitting around, what, $82 right now?
Yeah, right around $82 a pound. And the utilities that actually power our grids, they are already contracting around the exact narrative we're discussing today. I mean, the source data notes that utilities are heavily in procurement mode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, think about this. 87% of 2026 deliveries are already under long-term contracts.
87%, that's massive. Let's use an analogy here for the listener. The spot market is basically like an Airbnb rate, right?
Okay.
It fluctuates wildly depending on the weekend, who's in town, some short-term panic. But the term market is a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Oh, I like that.
Utilities aren't renting a weekend house. They're locking in their mortgages. And right now, they're rushing to buy the house before the rates go up even more.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The spot market is just fine-tuning the edges for those marginal pounds. The massive, slow-moving ice underneath all of this is that term contracting. The major players are already positioned for this rebuild. So the spot market, it just absorbs this week's news efficiently.
But, I mean, if these utilities are locking in their mortgages, they need absolute certainty that the house is actually being built.
Right.
Which brings us right back to that shovel in New Mexico. If the term price reflects the climate, let's look at the tectonic plates shifting underneath it. Let's start with enrichment.
Let's do it.
So that groundbreaking at Urenco USA on Wednesday, it's meant to expand America's only commercial enrichment plant. And this is directly downstream of that $2.7 billion federal enrichment package from back in January.
Right, a massive package.
Huge. But here's my pushback. If this new Urenco capacity doesn't even hit the market until, roughly 2028 to 2030?
Yes, somewhere in that window.
Does this actually solve the near-term squeeze we're seeing right now?
Well, what's fascinating here is the political framing, right?
Right.
And how that fundamentally alters corporate psychology.
Okay, how so?
Well, you're entirely correct on the physics. Pouring concrete today does not create a single new unit of enriched uranium tomorrow. The near-term bottleneck is completely intact. But the presence of the Energy Secretary at that groundbreaking, it signals that Washington is officially treating domestic enrichment as critical strategic infrastructure.
Like on par with semiconductor manufacturing or something.
Exactly. Semiconductors, deep water ports, you name it.
Okay, before we go further, let's actually explain the mechanism here for you guys listening, because I think a lot of people hear enrichment squeeze, and they don't actually know what the constraint is.
Yeah, it's misunderstood.
We're talking about a squeeze in SWU, right? Separative work units, but a SWU isn't a unit of weight like a pound or kilogram, is it?
No, it isn't. A separative work unit is essentially a measure of effort. It measures the energy and the work required to separate the fissile isotope, that's uranium-235, from the non-fissile uranium-238.
Okay.
You take uranium gas, you put it into a massive centrifuge, and you just spin it at supersonic speeds.
It's basically like separating the cream from raw milk.
Right.
But instead of using a standard dairy separator, you're using hyper-advanced machinery spinning so fast that the slightly heavier atoms push to the outside, and the slightly lighter valuable ones stay in the middle.
That is exactly it. And the West, well, we lost a massive amount of our cream separating capacity over the last couple of decades.
Because we relied on Russia.
Heavily. We relied heavily on Russia to do it for us. So when the Energy Secretary puts a shovel in the ground in New Mexico, no, it doesn't solve the SW squeeze today, but it puts a highly credible, federally backed ceiling on how long the West is going to remain dependent on Russian enrichment.
Right. So if you're a utility fuel buyer, your entire job is risk management. You look at that shovel and think, okay, the cavalry's coming. They won't get here until 2028, but I know they're actually on the way.
Yes.
So you're willing to sign long-term contracts at elevated prices today just to bridge that gap because you know the end game is a secure Western supply chain.
Exactly. It makes the 2028 future bankable today. It completely changes the shape of the long-term contract curve.
But, I mean, waiting until 2028 for Urenco's expansion, that doesn't really help a utility buyer who needs to load fuel into a reactor right now.
No, it doesn't.
They need physical mined uranium today to even start that whole enrichment process. So who is actually solving that immediate math?
That is the perfect question, and it takes us from New Mexico up to Wyoming. Because on the exact same day Urenco was breaking ground, Energy shipped its first pounds of uranium from the newly restarted Shirley Basin mine.
Wow, same day. Now, I know someone listening might look at the global demand numbers. I mean, we consume nearly 200 million pounds of uranium globally a year, and they might say, okay, one restarted mine in Wyoming is a pretty small volume.
Sure.
But the report places incredibly high strategic weight on this shipment. Why is a small volume out of Wyoming such a massive deal?
Because every single new pound that comes out of the American West marginally displaces imported product. And more crucially, those pounds are directly deliverable to U.S. utilities under domestic content preferences. I mean, the list of North American producers actually pushing physical, newly mined pounds through the door in 2026 is incredibly narrow.
And Energy just joined that list.
Exactly.
And they're using ISR mining at Shirley Basin, right, in situ recovery. Because when most people hear uranium mining, I think they picture, hard hats, pickaxes, and just massive open pit craters in the earth. But ISR isn't that at all, is it?
Not at all. ISR is a completely different chemical mechanism. You aren't moving millions of tons of rock. Instead, you basically drill a well field into the sandstone deposit.
It's essentially like brewing a massive pot of coffee underground. Right.
Yes, that's one way to put it.
Like instead of digging up the coffee beans, you pump a solvent down into the earth, the hot water in this analogy. It dissolves the uranium out of the porous sandstone, and then you just pump that uranium espresso back up to a processing plant on the surface.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Yes, you use an alkaline or an acid solution to dissolve the uranium right where it sits in the ground, pump the pregnant solution up to the surface, strip the uranium out, and then you just recirculate the fluid.
So it's way cleaner.
Much smaller environmental footprint, it's faster to spin up, and it's highly economical.
And the regulatory gears for this underground espresso are starting to turn faster across the board, too.
They are.
Because the source material highlights another event from Tuesday. A company called dissect just cleared an environmental assessment and a finding of no significant impact.
The EFONSI.
Right, the EFONSI for their Marianne site. And they are spinning up DISA uranium. So for the listener, what does this all actually mean for the broader ecosystem?
So what does this all mean? Well, if we look at the dissect news, it seems small in isolation, right? It's just a regulatory hurdle. It's not going to move the spot price today, but it is a massive structural signal for the pipeline going into 2028 and beyond. It proves that the U.S. permitting throughput for these ISR-scale projects is measurably accelerating.
Which is huge because it used to be so slow.
Glacial. For decades, the domestic supply chain was basically dormant. The permitting offices were sluggish, mines were on care and maintenance. But now, the mid-tier ISR base is officially waking up. The entire end-to-end supply chain is turning back on.
Okay, so the domestic U.S. rebuild is clearly underway. We've got shovels in the ground for centrifuges. We've got the coffee brewing ISR mines pumping yellow cake out of Wyoming.
Yep.
But I want to push back on our own narrative here for a second. The U.S. is just a drop in the bucket compared to the international giants that actually dictate global supply.
Fair point.
To understand the real anchor of this market, we have to talk about Kazakhstan.
The undeniable heavyweight champion of global uranium production.
Exactly. Kazatomprom, the state-owned producer, they released their Q2 operational update this week. And they reaffirmed their full-year guidance of 27,500 to 29,000 tons of uranium.
Right.
For context, that is roughly 71 to 75 million pounds. And their first half output was actually up 9% year over year. But here's the really crucial data point the report zeroes in on. Their sulfuric acid supply is officially stable.
And that sulfuric acid detail, it is the linchpin for their entire operation.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
What?
Because Kazatomprom exclusively uses ISR mining, so going back to your coffee analogy.
Yeah.
If you don't have water, you can't brew the espresso.
Oh, okay.
In Kazakhstan, sulfuric acid is the water. Last year, they had massive acid shortages, which forced them to downgrade their production targets. And it just sent shockwaves through the market.
Wait, pause for a second. Let's look at the market reaction here. If Kazatomprom is the biggest producer in the world and they just announced they solved their biggest production bottleneck, why didn't the spot price plummet? Usually, when massive supply chains clear up and input materials are secured, the market relaxes and prices drop. But spot went up to $88. Why?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the answer is production discipline. Yes, Kazatomprom is reaffirming their guidance, but that guidance is still well below their actual 100% capacity target.
So they're essentially running like an OPEC-style discipline playbook.
Yes.
Like Saudi Arabia refusing to fully open the oil taps, just holding back enough production to keep the global market tight.
That OPEC-style discipline is absolutely intact. They are actively choosing not to flood the market, which establishes a very firm floor for the price.
Okay.
But the reason the price didn't violently surge to $95 this week, despite the bullish news in the U.S., is precisely because of that stable acid supply.
I see.
The market had been pricing in a tail risk, a real fear that Kazatomprom would suffer another severe acid shortage and downgrade production again.
So Kazatomprom basically came out and said, hey, the worst case scenario is off the table.
Exactly. The single largest swing factor in the global uranium market just told everyone that its biggest downside operational risk for the year has been contained.
Wow.
That is a disinflationary signal at the margin. It essentially capped the panic buying on the spot market. It's the reason we saw a controlled, rational move to $88 instead of a panicked scramble. The market just priced out the doomsday scenario.
But, I mean, just because the acid is flowing doesn't mean the uranium easily gets to the west. We also have to factor in Cameco's joint venture with Kazatomprom at a mine called Inkai, right?
Right, Inkai.
The report notes they delivered 2.8 million pounds in Q2. They're running to plan operationally, but they have a heavy second-half skew for deliveries, meaning they need to ship a lot of material in the next few months. That brings logistics squarely into focus, doesn't it?
Well, logistics is kind of the hidden geopolitical variable here. I mean, Cameco is heavily freight exposed on this joint venture.
Right.
Historically, uranium from Kazakhstan would just jump on a train, go straight through Russia to St. Petersburg, and get on a ship.
But obviously they can't exactly do that easily right now.
Right, given the geopolitical climate and sanctions. So they're relying on the Trans-Caspian shipping route. And this is, honestly, it's this incredibly complex logistical ballet.
Oh, wow. How does that route work?
You have to load the uranium onto a ship, cross the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan, put it on a train through the Caucasus to Georgia, put it on another ship across the Black Sea, and finally get it to Western converters.
That is a lot of moving parts.
It is. And that heavy second-half skew means a massive amount of physical material has to move perfectly through this bottleneck before the year ends.
Okay, so we've established the playing field here. The U.S. domestic capacity is actively building both in enrichment and physical mining.
Yep.
The international supply anchor in Kazakhstan has stabilized its chemical inputs, but they are playing an OPEC game with supply, and the geopolitical shipping logistics are incredibly delicate.
That's the landscape.
That brings us to the horizon. Where does the market go from here, and what should you, the listener, be watching for over the next few weeks?
So the report flags three primary catalysts that will dictate the next leg of this market. The first one is the September utility RFP window.
RFP being requests for proposals.
Right.
This is when the utility buyers basically get back from their summer vacations, sit down at their desks, and actually go out to the market asking suppliers for bids on fuel.
Correct. The summer months in the nuclear fuel market are notoriously slow. It's a genuine lull. But as we move into September, the contracting activity experiences a massive step change.
Okay.
The market is waiting with bated breath to see if these September contract prints will test that $90 level. If utilities are willing to sign long-term deals reflecting those higher numbers, it validates the entire structural price floor we've been discussing.
The second catalyst ties right back into that complex logistical ballet you just described for Cameco and the Inkai joint venture Kazakh Q3 logistics.
Yes. Late August into early September is critical for the Trans-Caspian shipment cadence. It is the single biggest execution variable for both Cameco and Kazatomprom for the rest of the year.
Because it gets stuck.
Exactly. If those ships get delayed in the Caspian Sea, or if there's a bottleneck at the Georgian ports, it becomes an immediate catalyst that will tighten the spot market. If physical material gets stuck in transit and cannot reach Western converters on time, buyers will have to scramble on the spot market to cover their near-term needs.
Which could trigger that price spike we didn't see this week.
Precisely.
And the third catalyst is U.S. HALEU allocations. HALEU stands for High Assay Low Enriched Uranium. Before we talk about the catalyst, let's just explain the mechanism because HALEU is thrown around a lot as a buzzword.
It really is.
Traditional nuclear reactors use uranium enrichment to roughly 3 to 5% of that U-235 isotope we talked about earlier. But HALEU is enriched up to 20%. Why do we need this highly concentrated fuel?
It comes down to energy density and the physical footprint of the reactor. The nuclear industry is moving toward SMRs, or small modular reactors.
Right.
Instead of building a massive custom-designed power plant that takes 10 years and takes up the footprint of a sports stadium, you want to build a reactor in a factory that is roughly the size of a shipping container.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. But to get the same sustained baseload power out of a much smaller core, you need a much higher octane fuel. HAEU is that high-octane fuel.
Got it. So the report notes we need to watch for Department of Energy allocation announcements following a massive pact made on August 6th between Centrus Energy, the enrichment company, and X Energy, the reactor developer.
Right. Watching how the Department of Energy allocates federal funding and how Centrus contracts to physically produce that HALEU, it's going to tell us how fast the advanced reactor pipeline is moving from a futuristic drawing board into physical reality.
So if we synthesize all these moving parts, what is the ultimate takeaway for someone trying to really understand this market?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the core thesis is undeniable. The West is actively de-risking its Russian dependency in real time.
Yeah.
For 3 years, it was a theoretical ambition wrapped in policy jargon. But this week, with the shovels hitting the dirt in New Mexico and the yellow cake shipping out of Wyoming, that de-risking became bankable.
It's real now.
It is now tangible enough to justify long-dated utility contracts at prices well above the historical averages. The transition is locked in.
It's incredible how quickly a narrative can solidify when you actually see the physical infrastructure being built. Let's quickly recap the journey we just took.
Let's do it.
We started with literal shovels in the ground in New Mexico, validating the expansion of Western enrichment. We saw the first shipments of newly brewed uranium espresso rolling out of Wyoming, proving the domestic supply chain is actually waking up.
Yep.
And we saw the stabilization of critical sulfuric acid supplies in Kazakhstan, which capped panic buying and kept the spot price moving in a controlled, rational manner. All of this points to a foundational shift in the global nuclear fuel cycle.
And it highlights a fundamental truth about this market right now. The scarce resource in a decarbonizing, energy-hungry world is no longer just the political ambition to build nuclear plants.
No, not anymore.
The scarce resource is domestic conversion, domestic enrichment, and physical mined pounds that are actually delivered on time.
Yeah.
The bottleneck is physical physics.
Exactly. The constraint isn't demand anymore. The constraint is the physical supply chain. Which brings me to a final, slightly provocative thought I want to leave you with.
Okay, I'm listening.
The source material mentioned reactor developers like X Energy pre-buying fuel capacity through that Centrus offtake agreement. We know that next-generation tech companies and massive AI data centers are utterly desperate for firm, clean, 24/7 baseload power to run their servers.
Oh, absolutely desperate.
And they are looking heavily at these small modular reactors to provide it.
The demand pull we are seeing from the technology sector is entirely unprecedented. I mean, they have balance sheets that just dwarf traditional utilities.
Right. So here's the thought to mull over. Traditional utilities move slowly. They operate on long RFP cycles, heavily regulated timelines, deep bureaucracy. What happens if these deep-pocketed tech companies, the trillion-dollar balance sheets behind these AI data centers, what if they decide they can't afford to wait?
Wow. Yeah.
If they start aggressively bypassing the traditional utilities to directly secure their own nuclear fuel supply chains for these SMRs, could we see a literal run on the bank for physical uranium and enrichment capacity?
That is
A scenario where tech money simply overwhelms the traditional utility procurement cycle, driving a massive supply squeeze that current market models haven't even begun to price in.
It is a fascinating and honestly highly plausible scenario that fundamentally breaks the traditional supply and demand models.
It really does.
Because the utilities are used to competing with each other for fuel. They are absolutely not prepared to compete with a trillion-dollar tech giant that just decides it wants to buy the entire fuel cycle upfront just to ensure its data centers stay online.
It's definitely something to keep a very close eye on as this market evolves over the next year. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We always appreciate you spending your time with us to get into the mechanics and the weeds of these fascinating structural shifts.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Remember to watch the structural fundamentals, the physical logistics, and, not just the daily noise. Take care.
Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon. And remember that shovel in the New Mexico dirt, because the physical future of energy is being dug right now.